Well, Happy New Year to everybody, and it's a joy to be celebrating it with all of you great souls who are all of us eagerly striving to change ourselves in very significant and deep ways and trying to get closer to God. The New Year, even though in a way it's an artificial timing thing, in a way it has some relevance. It is the darkest, shortest days of the year, and the days are starting to get longer, so it is a time of withdrawing within and starting to go without or out more outward. And so it is a very good time to sort of reboot our operating system, because you'll find, if you use a computer, as I think probably everyone here does, after a while, background programs start to stay tying up resources and things bog down and memory starts getting lost, and you have to reboot the computer and get a fresh start. And it gets rid of all these things that are bogging it down. And in a way, this is what the New Year is like, and it's really what we can be doing every day, which is simply to get a fresh start. I think so many of us, and Yoganandaji was very keen on this. He talked about the past year as just getting rid of all of it. And he talked about it in very dramatic ways, about all the sorrows and all the pains and suffering and failures, but even also successes, because everything that we hold on to with our mind and with our feelings, it ties up some of our energy. It hogs the resources in the background. And so a New Year is a very good time just to do a complete hard reboot of our whole mind operating system. Yes, reflect on what's gone on in the year, the lessons that we've learned, but then completely leave them behind. And you'll find that having that fresh perspective can be very liberating and freeing. And in fact, it's actually necessary if you want liberation. A couple of weeks ago, I was at a large conference in Delhi, and it was many, many great souls there who are involved with charity and giving and serving. And it was very inspiring because they used many of the same words that we use: selflessness, compassion, kindness, giving. That was the theme of this whole 2-day conference, where I and many others gave talks. But one person said something that I almost wanted to stand up and shout out, "That's not true, that's not true." And what he said was, we're all born. And he said within 10 minutes, we're given a religion imposed on us by being baptized or whatever. We're given a name that we don't choose that's imposed on us. We're given a nationality and an identity card that we do not choose. And then we go through our whole life being bound by those things to the very day that we die. And the reason I wanted to stand up and say that's not true, because I have a name now that is not the name that I was born with. I have a religion that is not the religion I was born with. I live on the other side of the world from the place that I was born. And this really is the way of the yogi, in a way. And this is not about me, it's about all of us. We all want to, as Swami Kriyanandaji very often, near the end of his life, he kept repeating this phrase that was very interesting. He said that most people are a bundle of self-identification. And we really are when we look at it. And what this means is that we identify with my nationality, my religion, my family, the things that I do. And one of the other ones is over-identification with what we do. In America, it's very common if you are meeting somebody for the first time, or you're at a party or an event, and you meet a stranger, the first thing they ask is, "What do you do?" As if that is your entire identification. And of course, it's also a conversation starter, so it's just a way to start talking. But we also tend to identify ourselves and who we are with what we do. And all this is very narrowing and limiting. One of the joys of serving Ananda Sangha, as I have for many years, is that in 40 years I haven't had a career as doing any one thing. I was a gardener for 14 years. I managed a dairy and milked cows every morning and evening for 4 years. I launched and managed the Ananda.org worldwide website for 7 years. I've done Kriya Sangha. I've done many, many things. And one of the great things that Yoganandaji did with his disciples, and Swami Kriyananda also, was to break people from identifying with a particular role that they have. And that's one of the challenges, I think, of teachers and acharyas coming from America to teach and serve in Ananda, India. Sagar and I were talking about this on the drive up yesterday to Mumbai, is that most of the long-time disciples and devotees who come to serve here in India are either acharyas or they're leaders in some way. And it gives the wrong impression, because it gives the impression that one who is a devotee and a disciple, if they really work at it, they can become an acharya or a spiritual leader. And when you live at Ananda Village, where I've lived most of my life, you see all these amazing saints there. Many of them, most of them, and I think I would say that some of them are the saintliest people at Ananda Village, have never given a talk, never given a class. They've never had a role of, quote, leadership or spiritual authority, yet I've seen them become saints over the 40 years. And so I just want people to see that it doesn't matter what we do, and get away from defining even spiritual success by what it is that we do. We just really, in the end, we want to get away from that self-identification and realize that moksha, liberation, is available for everyone, because we are all children of the infinite. And so our identification needs to change from this little self with this name, this religion, this nationality. In fact, Yoganandaji once said that one of the purposes of not remembering our past lives is that if we remembered them, he said it would be very discouraging, because we would identify with all of our past failures and mistakes. And so we need that fresh reboot once every lifetime, but we don't need to do it every lifetime. We can do it every year. We can do it even every night. I was just talking to someone here about something I shared on a webinar the other night that Sagar and I gave. And it's just a practice that I enjoy doing, which is every night I do this reboot of my whole system. And the way I do it is that as I'm going to sleep, I offer everything that I am, everything I've done in the day, everything I'm worrying about, all my problems, all the mistakes, the hurts I've either given or received, and I just put them at the feet of Divine Mother. And I say, tonight, I'm ready to leave the body. Maybe it will happen in my sleep, but when it does happen, if it does happen tonight, I want to be completely free. I don't want to leave anything behind. And you'll see that great yogis, when they leave the body, they're not worrying about that email they haven't answered yet, or that thing that they said to someone, or this or that. They're finally surrendering themselves into the infinite. And the reason, and we've seen this with so many great Ananda souls, the reason they're able to do that is that they do it on a regular basis. And that comes in a couple of different ways. By offering everything to God at the end of every day, even in every meditation, giving it all back and saying, Lord, I'm yours. I'm a child of the infinite. I'm none of these things. I'm none of the things that I've done. I'm not what I do. I am a child of the infinite light, and I offer myself back into that light with complete freedom, joy, and self-offering. And you'll find that usually you'll wake up the next day after doing that. So far I've woken up every single day. I'm not disappointed that I woke up back in this body, but I have to say that every day when I wake up, there's a great deal of inner freedom and joy, and truly a fresh start. I don't feel bound by what I've done in the past, nearly as much as if, again, I identify with this little self. The other problem with this self-identification is not the different identifications that we have, but just the mere fact that we're identifying with something that is not real. We're identifying with something that is very narrow and limited, when we really should be identifying with the infinite. And this is why we meditate twice a day. Yes, we talk about how it's important to have a regular practice and habit and discipline and consistency. But in the end, the reason for all of those things is that when we meditate, we turn our self-identity from this little self. We can offer it into the infinite self the way that I've been talking, but simply by meditating on the inner light, we're changing our focus and what we identify with from littleness to bigness, to vastness, to the infinite. And so this is the opportunity of a new year, is that fresh start. And it is helpful also just to have some New Year's resolutions that we practice. There's many, having been on this path for 40 years and having done a lot of New Year's resolutions, failed at quite a number of them. I'm a heroic failure at New Year's resolutions over the years. So I've learned over the years how to do it in a better way. One of them is to focus on something positive that you're putting into your life rather than a negative that you're trying to overcome, a fault or a shortcoming or a limitation. Try to tune into some very simple, it can be very, very simple. Just think, if you make one simple but relevant change every year of your life for the rest of your life, this will be a lot of change in your life. It doesn't have to be one big grandiose one. And I've been sort of a victim of this, where I take a vow and a New Year's resolution to meditate X number of hours a day, which is way beyond what I'm used to doing. And around about day 3, I fail at it, and I think, no way can I do this for a whole year. And I just basically give up in despair, but also with some humor, because I realized I was overreaching in a way. So work with coming up with something positive. Also work with habit. Habit is probably the biggest way that we can change our lives. And we normally think of habits as things, again, things that we do. Meditating every day, brushing our teeth, flossing every day, and eating the right kind of food and diet every day. But even those things come from the mind, and come from the will, and come from the heart's feelings. And so try also to change habits, but also especially habitual ways of thinking and habitual ways of approaching life. If you have the habit of anger or irritation or frustration, rather than saying, I'm not going to get angry and I'm not going to get angry, essentially what you're doing is you're repressing it and you're denying it. And I've seen a lot of yogis do this over the years, where I'm a yogi and I'm spiritual, and it's not spiritual to have intense desires, so I don't have desires, and it just turns into repression. And we're wanting to transmute all of these things. And so again, the positive approach is the way to go, but also work with habits of thought, habits of feeling. One of the greatest New Year's habits that I've ever worked on is developing the habit of devotion, or turning my mind to God at certain points during the day. And it's a very fun thing to do. It's a very simple thing to do. I've talked about it here before, but if you haven't tried this, start the practice. And I first would start by, when I woke up in the morning, it was a game to see how quickly I could turn my mind to God. And in the beginning, it was, I'd rub my eyes and hear the clock going off and slam the alarm clock off. And finally, after a few minutes, I'd realize, oh yes, I'm here to find God, and I would turn my mind to God, and let's see tomorrow if I can do it more quickly than that. And it became a game, and it became a fun game, and a game that over time became very much more successful. And so that's as one habit, is just at certain times and at other times too. Say when you walk out the door of your apartment, somehow use that moment and say, every time I walk out this door from now on, I'm going to turn my mind to God and to the Guru. And you'll find that if you do enough of these little things, then finally during the day, it adds up. And more you start turning your heart's feelings towards the divine more and more often. And it's a step-by-step process. And this is, New Year's is a time to take a step, to take a positive step in a right, positive direction. Now, the greatest change that comes to us doesn't come just from our own willpower and energy and doing things. The great masters have talked about this so many times. Swami Kriyanandaji, in talking about even the Kriya Yoga technique, because we hear that Kriya Yoga, doing one practice of Kriya is equal to 1 year of spiritual evolution, and we think, okay, I'm going to use all my willpower and crank out 1,000,000 Kriyas in the next 10 years and get 1,000,000 years of growth, and you use willpower and energy. But Swamiji, in talking about Kriya, one time he said, every Kriya I see now, this is after 65 years of practice, should be an act of devotional self-offering. And then the next sentence, he explains why. He says, because ultimately, it's only through God's grace that we are changed. Now, this isn't a call to passivity and say, well, if only God's grace can change me, then I'm ready, Lord. Lay it on me. I'm waiting. And you can wait a long time. And the great yogis, and especially our guru, taught that we have to use all of our willpower, all of our energy. But when you try to make changes in the coming year and any time in your life, use all of the willpower, all of the energy, but always bring God into it. Bring the Divine Mother into it, bring the Guru into it. That you're working with them on this, and that you're bringing their consciousness, because when we lift ourselves up with willpower, with energy, in the right way, we are lifting ourselves up into that state of divine grace. Divine grace, Swamiji, as he once put it, quoting one of the great saints of India, who said that divine grace is like a river. And in the center of the river, the current is very, very strong. On the banks of the river, it's very weak. Even on the very outward banks, if you're standing there, you're walking through mud and getting stuck, and there's thickets and brambles and shrubs and trees that you're trying to climb through. And progress is made by going out into the river. And you have to put out the effort to go out to the river. You have to go walking through the mud, then you have to start swimming and put out the effort to swim. But if you put out the right effort in the right way, in the way of tuning in to God, tuning into grace, with the practices of yoga, willpower, affirmation, Kriya Yoga that we all have, then this is why Yoganandaji said, efforts end in ease. Because when you put out the right effort, in the right way, as I'm talking about, we make it out into that center of the river, which is flowing very, very strongly. And then at that point, we are in the flow of divine grace, and we hardly have to make any effort except to maybe stay afloat and to enjoy the grace of God. This is the fruit of a lifetime of yoga, devotion, meditation, seva, selflessness. When people live a life like that, I can say, again, without exception, as I've said many times, all the Ananda devotees and other great saints who have lived their life like this, step by step, year after year, day after day, you find that you do become inwardly free to a point where at the end there is nothing but divine joy, divine inner freedom, complete acceptance of everything that's ever happened in our lives, seeing that it's all come from God in some way as a divine grace, even when that grace is very difficult and hard, to help us in some way to become free. So this coming year, let's really put out the right kind of effort. If you make a New Year's resolution, there's still time. It's still January 1st. There's still time to come up with something that especially and consciously will put you into the flow of divine grace. One year for me, this was to really tune into Kriya Yoga more deeply. Sagar mentioned this. We're going to have a year of Kriya Yoga for those who are Kriya Bandhs, to go more deeply into Kriya. And one year that was my vow, was to go really much, much more deeply into Kriya Yoga than I had ever gone in my life. And that year, more changes happened both outwardly and inwardly than in the previous 20 years. And it wasn't that I was just putting willpower into it. I was doing it with more devotion, with more intensity, with more yearning, with more guru attunement. And so the right kind of effort, done with God, done with the gurus, can make amazing and even miraculous changes in our lives. So let's use this new year as a time to reboot, re-energize, refocus our spiritual practices, but especially use them as a way to change our focus and our attention from this little self into our divine self. So may the Masters bless all of our efforts, and may they lift us up and make us free in this coming year. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.